One person is dead. 5 people were injured after a car crashed into the emergency room entrance here behind me. What I do know from some of those law enforcement sources is that this was a shooting. 200 of them, in fact, showing up to help with the scene, and you can hear the wind there. When they got here, they found 2 bodies in that car. It is tied to that homicide that we learned about earlier today. Testimony today came from Austin police officers who were on the scene with Christopher Taylor when the shooting happened in 2020. Spencer Cronk is no longer sitting at the dais. That's because about an hour ago, all but one city council member voted to remove him. Well, it's hugely celebratory here. A very interesting end to this race. Watson won, however, did not win Travis County. This alligator here behind me lived in the backyard of a Central Texas woman's home. Well, excitement, talk about it. Just about 2 minutes ago, Brad Pitt walked by and I could have reached out and touched him. Good morning, Kai. It's cold. Back to you. No, I'm just kidding. Here's a look at the roads.
Come on, you got this. Come on.
This family of 5 was on the brink of homelessness for years. You're working multiple jobs in the city and you all cannot afford to live here.
Yeah, it was crazy.
After losing a rental, they bounced from a church shelter to a hotel. Finally, an affordable unit at Foundation Communities opened up.
We were so relieved because it had been just kind of back to back. Yeah, it was really good to not be running anymore.
Foundation Communities is one of the Austin nonprofits funded by the city's affordable housing bonds.
This is nice.
Without that money, the director says families like this one might be left with nowhere to go.
Without the bonds, Foundation Communities would not be able to build, a new property or sometimes 2 properties a year. I would say 3,000 of our residents right now, half of our portfolio wouldn't exist without the housing bonds.
Voters approved the last housing bond in 2018, $250 million, largely spent in 3 ways. Funding groups like Foundation Communities to help create rental and other housing units, existing home repair help, which the city says is one of the cheapest ways to keep people in Austin, and purchasing property for the city to construct or renovate new housing itself. But years later, much of that property is still untouched.
Land is only getting more expensive. This is going to be the cheapest it's going to be for quite some time. And so we are going to be very thankful 2, 5, 10 years down the road that we have this land available to develop.
Several hotels were among the more controversial properties purchased, including what is now the Northbridge Shelter. That's being used as an emergency shelter instead of originally planned permanent supportive housing. And the former Candlewood Suites Hotel, which still has no residents nearly 2 years after its purchase. The city's Homeless Strategy Division says it's awaiting permits and should open around 6 months after permit approval, housing nearly 80 older adults. Overall, the director of Austin's Housing and Planning Department says the city is spending bond money effectively, but it's not enough. Has it made a dent in our affordability crisis?
Absolutely. I know we have our strategic housing blueprint that calls for a large number of housing units across all levels of affordability for the city. When we adopted that in 2016, we identified the gap to meet the affordable housing funding in 2016 or 2017 dollars as $11 billion. There's no way that the city that one department or that the city of Austin can fund entirely the gap for affordable housing.
Are you saying that the stuff laid out by the city here would cost $11 billion to achieve?
In 2017 dollars, yes.
Do you think the goals set out here are achievable?
I would like them to be. It's what we needed.
The city contracted with Housing Works Austin, another nonprofit, to track progress of those goals. But the latest scorecard from 2021 shows the city is falling short. For instance, plans called for 20,000 units built between 2017 and 2027 for people in the lowest median income level. But by the end of 2021, only around 300 were complete.
The city is behind in the lowest housing that's needed. It requires the most subsidy, so it's very, very hard to sort of put that kind of unit on the ground.
In Ryan Alter's district, only 5 affordable housing units were built in 2020 and 2021 combined. The newly elected council member sits on the Housing and Planning Committee and says he's focused on increasing those numbers.
It is very discouraging to look at that blueprint and see red arrows across the board. We are just way off track.
Alter has already introduced several council resolutions to change Austin's land development code, which hasn't seen a significant overhaul in decades. He thinks it's the best way to incentivize private developers to help.
We can't just rely on subsidized housing to meet these goals. We need to actually change the fundamentals of how we do development in Austin that encourages people to build naturally affordable housing.
Alter hopes those changes will stretch the funding voters approved last year and make a difference faster. The city's housing director says the next round will help continue the work started in 2018.
I am concerned that our dollars are going to continue to not stretch as far. And that's just what we're seeing with construction costs and the per unit subsidy that we're getting asked for.
That money will get invested in new projects over the next 3, 4, 5 years, and it'll go quickly. And then we're probably going to have to come back to the voters again.
Come on.
Some housing leaders tell us it will require billions more.
Well, this is our little place.
But families like this one say the investment is worth it.
Like, for me, that's really what home, like, symbolizes. Like, being able to relax, not worry, be calm.
Alfredo Reyes Jr. is one of the many people the city of Austin helped get off the streets and into rapid rehousing. But the American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA dollars that likely put him there, are running out, and Reyes knows it.
Remember, if we're trying to get on our feet, we're actually trying to get work. We're trying to do something to better ourselves. If we're doing that, money runs out, we're back in the street. We have no other options.
According to the city's latest annual report to the Department of Treasury, the city of Austin has dedicated roughly $100 million ARPA dollars to homelessness, roughly $40 million of that to rapid rehousing.
What the reality is that we're coming into it. So we have to ask ourselves as policymakers, what is the best and highest use of our limited public dollars?
ARPA funds have to be allocated by the end of this year, and they have to be fully spent by the end of 2026. The city's chief financial officer recently described that as a, quote, fiscal cliff the city will have to deal with.
This is going to be top of mind during the next budget deliberations later this summer, and the conversations with providers are ongoing.
Councilmember Vanessa Fuentes says the city will continue to make investments in homelessness, but it may very well not be to the level it's funding them now.
Nobody wants to live underneath a bridge. Nobody wants to live in the streets. Nobody wants to be going to jail because they're in the street. They want better, but it's not going to happen unless we have long-term, housing, and I hope I'm around to see that.
Grace Reeder, KXAN News. Here at the Texas Capitol, while history is being made in the Senate.
I realized that this impeachment hearing was going on, so we've been walking around seeing all the buzz and activity around the Capitol building.
It's not just tourists.
It's not something that I would have had at the top of my list for things I'd see at the Capitol.
Flooding to the rotunda.
I'm seeing them jumping around the floors in the building. They're everywhere.
We've definitely seen a lot of crickets.
While the Ken Paxton impeachment trial is historic, the cricket infestation fueling additional biblical chatter around it is not.
It's the season. Crickets typically, or the field crickets, which are the large black ones, those typically tend to show up kind of late summer into early fall, but it's really going to be based on a lot of weather.
So that welcome rain we got earlier this week is also the reason you may have some unwanted visitors now. The Capitol earning no exception, regardless of the occasion.
It's going to be weather dependent. I'm going to say they're probably going to be here for at least a month and a half to 2 months.
Capitol staff told us they're working to sweep the crickets away, especially the dead ones, which start smelling. But in the meantime, while there may be no coincidences, in Austin, there are going to be crickets.
This is an interesting surprise, but happy to report our findings. There's crickets everywhere.
Grace Reeder, KXAN News.